Rain pelted the cracked stone facade of St. Jude's Church, turning the ancient wooden door slick and black. Father Thomas leaned against the altar, whispering prayers he hadn't truly believed in for years. A sudden scratching broke the silence. Frenzy, persistent, almost desperate. At first, he thought it was the wind rattling the shutters. But the rhythm was deliberate. A German shepherd sat outside, soaked, trembling, claws scraping insistently against the weathered wood. In its mouth, something small and wrapped in damp cloth shifted. Thomas's heart tightened. Whatever was there, it had been left for him. If you're enjoying the story, a quiet like and subscribe helps keep more of these little mysteries coming. The rain had been relentless all evening, a drumming, endless pulse on the slate roof of St. Jude's Church. The air smelled of wet stone and decaying leaves, thick and heavy, pressing against Father Thomas like the weight of unseen eyes. He'd finished locking up the night, his rosary sliding between fingers that had long stopped believing in the power it symbolized. The town of Millersford was quiet, too quiet, and Thomas felt the familiar tug of loneliness settle in his chest. At 72, he had seen little more than empty pews and hollow greetings. Then came the scratching, a sharp, urgent noise at the heavy wooden door. At first, he froze, assuming it was just a branch thrashing in the wind. But the rhythm was too precise. A claw tapped 3 times, paused, tapped twice more. Someone or something was out there, and it wasn't random. He sighed and straightened, gripping the brass candle holder on the altar for balance. Who's there? His voice trembled despite his effort to sound steady. The scratching stopped. Then, after a long, haunting pause, it started again, this time accompanied by a low whine. Thomas's heart rate quickened. The church had not seen a visitor in months. Not since old Mrs. Kendrick had passed, and no one had replaced her as caretaker. The night air was cold, dripping with rainwater from the eaves, and he could hear the muffled roll of the river behind the church. He approached the door cautiously, the wooden floorboards groaning under his weight. Outside, huddled against the threshold, sat a German shepherd, its fur plastered to its body by the rain. Its eyes were deep pools of fear and something else, urgency, perhaps, or desperation. Clutched between its teeth was a small, sodden bundle, wrapped in cloth that might have once been white. Thomas froze, unable to move. He'd seen enough tragedy to recognize the signs, and yet his mind refused to accept the obvious. "Good dog, it's okay," he murmured, his voice cracking. The dog's ears twitched, but it did not relax. Its gaze never left him, a silent plea demanding trust. With trembling hands, he reached for the door latch, the brass cold against his palm. The dog whined again, a sound that made his stomach twist. Slowly, he pulled the door open, the hinges shrieking in protest. The bundle dropped from the dog's mouth, hitting the wet floor with a muffled thud. Thomas bent over, heart hammering, and carefully untied the cloth. Inside, a child, a small girl, maybe 5 or 6, shivering and pale, with wide brown eyes that seemed too old for her face. Her clothes were soaked and torn, and her tiny fingers gripped at nothing, shaking uncontrollably. "She's alive," Thomas whispered, and the word felt fragile, like it might shatter if spoken too loudly. The dog pressed against the doorframe, tail tucked, eyes watching every movement. "Don't worry, you're safe now," he said softly, lifting the child into his arms. Her body was lighter than expected, almost unnervingly so, but the warmth of life radiated through her. The church smelled of old incense and rainwater, and the combination made Thomas gag slightly, but he held on. He placed her on a pew, wrapping a dry blanket around her trembling form. The dog remained by the door, reluctant to enter but unwilling to leave. Thomas crouched beside the girl, examining her more closely. There were bruises along her arms, faint and purple, and a thin scratch across her cheek. Someone had been cruel. Someone had left her here, in the middle of the storm, with only this animal for protection. "Father?" The girl's voice was barely a whisper, raw and trembling. "Please don't let them find me." Thomas's stomach turned. "No one will. Child, you're safe. I promise." He realized he didn't even know her name. "What's your name?" "Lila," she said, voice quivering. She burrowed into the blanket as if Thomas himself could protect her from everything in the world. Thomas allowed himself a deep breath, but it did little to calm his racing heart. He had lived in Millerford all his life, seen enough crime and misery to know that Lila's arrival was no accident. Whoever had left her was still out there, and they would not give up easily. The dog, sensing his tension, padded closer and pressed its wet nose against Lila's blanket. She giggled softly, the first sound that didn't sound like fear. "Good dog," she whispered, stroking the animal's head. Thomas noticed a small, engraved tag on the dog's collar. It was worn, scratched, and almost illegible, but he could make out a single word. Haven. He frowned. Haven. Was it the dog's name? Or a sign? Something inside him stirred. A memory of a long-forgotten newspaper article about a series of child disappearances years ago. They had all vanished without a trace, and all the leads had run cold. Could this be connected? The sound of tires on the wet road outside made Thomas stiffen. He moved toward the window, peeking through the rain-smeared glass. No cars, no lights, just a storm. But there was a sense of being watched, a prickling of the skin that told him danger wasn't far behind. "Father, why are you looking at me like that?" Lila asked, pulling the blanket closer. Thomas realized he had been staring at her as though he could read her thoughts. He forced himself to smile, though it was shaky. "Nothing, Lila. Nothing at all. You just survived something very bad. That's all." He had to call someone. Anyone, but the storm had knocked out the phone lines. He was alone. The isolation of the church suddenly felt suffocating. His eyes darted around, and he noticed a small puddle forming near the corner, dripping from the leaky roof. His mind wandered back to the German shepherd. Whoever left her trusted only this dog. Thomas moved to the door, speaking softly to the animal. "Do you want to come inside, boy? Girl?" The dog hesitated, then stepped in, shaking itself violently, sending droplets flying across the pews. Lila shrieked with delight, and Thomas allowed himself a brief smile. The dog's coat was matted, but its eyes burned with intelligence, loyalty, and something almost human. He knelt beside Lila, who was now clutching the dog's neck. "You're safe now," he whispered again. But the weight of his own words rang hollow. He knew this was only the beginning. Whoever had abandoned her would come back. And when they did, he had to be ready. Thomas's mind began racing through scenarios, checking for every possible weakness. The church was old, the doors reinforced with decades-old bolts, and he had a shotgun in the vestry. But would that be enough? He knew he couldn't keep Lila here forever. She needed protection, medical attention, answers. Outside, the rain intensified, hammering the roof like 1,000 tiny fists. The wind howled through the cracks in the stone walls, carrying with it the distant echo of something or someone moving in the forest beyond the graveled path. Thomas's grip tightened on the pew, knuckles white. They're out there, and they know where she is. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the occasional growl from the dog and the soft breathing of the girl. Thomas finally dared to ask, "Lila, do you remember anything?" Her small hands gripped the blanket. "No, just shadows. And a man with a mask." He said I couldn't scream. Her voice broke, and Thomas felt a pang of helplessness. He realized then that the dog was not just a guardian. It was a witness. It had brought Lila to him, guided her through the storm, and perhaps even shielded her from her captor. He stroked its head, whispering thanks he didn't entirely feel he deserved. As the night deepened, Thomas couldn't shake the sense that someone or something was waiting for them. He would not sleep. He could not sleep. The shadows in the church seemed to grow longer, the corners darker, as if the building itself were bracing for what was to come. And in the quietest moment, when the rain seemed to pause just long enough for him to think, he heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible scraping at the vestry door. Not the storm, not the wind. Someone was inside. Thomas's heart stopped. He whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "They're here." Lila's small hand gripped his arm. The dog growled low, a sound that sent shivers down his spine. He reached for the shotgun. Every instinct screamed at him. Protect the girl, protect the church, survive the night. Outside, The storm raged, but inside, a different kind of storm had just begun. The first sounds of movement were subtle. Barely a shuffle against the worn wooden floorboards of the vestry. Thomas held his breath, shotgun raised, fingers trembling but steadying with each shallow inhale. The German shepherd, now lying between him and Lila, growled low, a warning that vibrated through the damp church walls. Lila clutched his sleeve, her small body pressed against his leg, shivering from cold and fear. "Who's there?" Thomas called, his voice steady but measured. Silence answered, thick and oppressive. The storm outside had not eased. Rain drummed relentlessly against the slate roof, masking other noises, but Thomas felt it, the presence of someone else, watching, waiting, hiding. A slow, deliberate cough came from the corner near the altar. Thomas turned his head, shotgun rising, and his eyes met a figure stepping from the shadows. A man, tall, clad in a dark overcoat, water dripping from his hat. His face was partially obscured by the brim, but the eyes, cold, calculating, almost familiar, pierced Thomas. "You shouldn't have come here," the man said, voice calm but threaded with menace. Thomas tightened his grip on the shotgun. "Who are you? What do you want?" The man's lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. "The girl. You have her." Thomas felt a surge of protectiveness that made his stomach churn. "Lila is safe," he said firmly, "and I'm not letting anyone take her." Not letting anyone or not trusting anyone. The man's voice was almost a whisper now, an unsettling cadence that made the hairs on Thomas's neck rise. The dog sprang forward, barking, teeth bared. The man raised a hand, not in aggression, but in acknowledgement. "Easy," he said. "I'm not here to hurt the dog, or you. I just need her for a little while." Thomas's mind raced. Who was this man? And why did his eyes look so familiar? He had seen that look somewhere years ago on someone he had trusted, but he couldn't place it, couldn't remember. He steadied his voice. "I don't know who you are, but she's a child. You're not taking her anywhere." The man laughed softly, a sound that was more chilling than threatening. "You don't understand, Father. You've been protecting her from the truth." Thomas frowned. The truth? Her parents, or what was left of them, never wanted her to survive. Thomas staggered back. What are you talking about?" The man's eyes hardened. "She witnessed things she shouldn't have. People who wanted to keep the town's secrets buried made sure she almost didn't survive. I'm the one who ensured she lived." Thomas's mind spun. He had lived in Miller's Ford for decades, known its history better than most, and yet this revelation made no sense. Witness what? What secrets? Why the hell are you telling me this now? Thomas demanded. "Because she's awake now," the man said simply. "And the people hunting her, they will come. Soon." Before Thomas could respond, a sudden crash echoed from the back of the church. He spun, shotgun ready, and saw movement, shadows flickering in the rain-soaked darkness. His heart leapt into his throat. Someone was inside the church, other than this man and the dog. Someone was after Lila. "Hide her," the man hissed, pointing at the vestry door. Thomas quickly ushered Lila inside, covering her with a blanket. She whimpered but obeyed, and the dog followed, growling low, nose twitching as though sniffing danger in every corner. The intruders entered silently, like predators moving through the underbrush. Thomas could hear the creak of boots, the hiss of rainwater sliding off the roof. The storm outside had become a secondary soundtrack. Now it was a human threat, deliberate and calculated, that dominated his senses. "You shouldn't have brought her here," a third voice said. A woman this time, soft but razor-sharp. Thomas recognized her immediately. Helena Crawford. He had known her as a journalist once. 20 years ago, someone he had trusted to expose corruption in the town council. But she had vanished after a scandal that had destroyed the town's only orphanage. And now, here she was, smiling faintly, with eyes that didn't hide anything, except perhaps conscience. "What are you doing here?" Thomas demanded, pointing the shotgun. "To ensure she doesn't remember," Helena said, stepping closer. "You don't know what this child has seen. If she talks." Her words trailed off, the threat hanging like fog in the air. Thomas realized then that he was surrounded by someone claiming to protect her and someone intending to erase her memory. The dog growled low in warning, shifting its stance between Thomas and Lila. The tension was unbearable, every heartbeat echoing in the hollow church. The man, her savior, spoke again. "We need to move. She can't stay here." "She stays," Thomas said, voice hardening, "until I know she's safe. And you," he glared at Helena, "won't harm her." Helena laughed softly. "You're brave, foolishly brave. But bravery doesn't change facts." Suddenly, the dog lunged at Helena, teeth snapping, knocking her back. She yelped, stumbling into the altar. The mass tension cracked for a moment, enough for Thomas to act. He fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The sound was deafening, echoing like thunder. Everyone froze. The storm outside seemed to quiet in response, as if nature itself was listening. The dog barked, teeth bared, hackles raised. Lila began crying softly in the corner. The man stepped forward, hands raised in surrender. "Calm, everyone calm. This isn't the time for violence." Thomas felt sweat dripping down his back, his chest tight. He realized he didn't trust anyone, not the man, not Helena, not even familiar dog entirely. Yet, somehow, the dog had guided Lila here. Somehow, it had chosen him as the guardian. Helena, brushing herself off, said softly, almost conspiratorially, "You don't understand the forces at play here, Father. Miller's Ford isn't what it seems. It's built on lies, on blood. She saw it, and now she's the last living witness." Thomas's head spun. The last living witness? But that would mean... "Yes," Helena said, eyes cold. "They will come for her, and they won't stop until she's gone." The man stepped forward again. "There's a safe place, but we need to move now. If we stay, she'll be taken before dawn." Thomas hesitated, gripping the shotgun so tightly his knuckles were white. He glanced at Lila, curled into the blanket, eyes wide and fearful. He thought of the church, the sanctuary that had sheltered him for decades, and knew he could not leave it behind lightly. The dog whined softly, nuzzling Lila. In that moment, Thomas realized the bond between child and dog was more than chance. It was fate. Someone had guided them here. And now he had to decide. Trust a stranger and leave the only home he'd known, or face the unknown and fight against forces he could barely comprehend. A sudden crash from the back door made everyone flinch. Someone or multiple people were attempting entry. Thomas realized the storm had been both a blessing and a curse, masking sounds, hiding movement, but also leaving them vulnerable. Helena glanced at him, expression unreadable. "You're out of time, Father." He took a deep breath, centering himself. "Then we go, but I'm taking her with me." The man nodded, and for the first time, Thomas noticed a faint scar on his hand. The same scar he had seen on the police report of the Miller's Ford disappearance 20 years ago. Recognition hit him like a bolt. This is Detective Callahan, the one who was supposed to protect those children back then. Memories flooded in, lost children, reports of abuse, and a cover-up that had destroyed the town. Callahan's motives were not entirely clear, and Thomas realized he didn't know whether he could fully trust him. But right now, Lila's safety was paramount. As they moved toward the vestry, the dog leading the way, Thomas's mind raced. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound amplified. The church, which had been a sanctuary moments ago, now felt like a trap. And outside, the storm raged, hiding the hunters who were surely closing in. Lila whispered, voice quivering, "Father, will they find me?" Thomas swallowed hard. "Not if I can help it. Not if we're careful." The man glanced at him, eyes dark and unreadable. "You don't know what you're up against." Thomas nodded, silently acknowledging the truth he already felt in his bones. Whoever had taken Lila, whoever had orchestrated the horrors of Miller's Ford, they were patient, ruthless, and clever, and they were still hunting. The rain's relentless drumming, the shadows stretching long and distorted in the flickering candlelight, and the sense of impending doom pressed on him from all sides. Every step toward the back exit was a gamble. Every breath could be the last unguarded moment. The dog growled again, low and warning, as if sensing something Thomas could not. He realized the animal had been more than a guide. It was a protector, a sentinel against forces beyond his understanding. And in this storm, in this old, isolated church, Thomas felt the terrifying weight of responsibility, not just for the child, not just for the dog, but for the fragile thread of hope that remained in Miller's Ford. The door loomed ahead, heavy and slick with rain. Thomas's hand rested on the handle, and he felt the full weight of the night settle on him. Shadows lurked in every corner, secrets hid in every drop of rain. One step out that door and everything could change. One wrong decision could mean death, or worse. And as the door creaked open, Thomas realized the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm he was walking into. The back door of St. Jude's creaked open into the rain-soaked night. Thomas felt the cold, wet air bite through his coat, the wind whipping his collar into his face. The German shepherd moved ahead, alert, ears pricked, muscles coiled like springs. Lila's small hand gripped as tightly. Fingers icy, but her eyes held the faintest glimmer of trust, the one thing Thomas clung to amidst the chaos. Detective Callahan, wet and grim, glanced back once, his eyes briefly meeting Thomas's. There was an urgency there, yes, but also a hardness, a shadow of guilt. Thomas couldn't forget the scar on his hand in the old case, the years of hidden mistakes, the children lost. And now, he realized Lila was a living reminder of both failure and redemption. "Where are we going?" Thomas asked, his voice low, almost a whisper above the storm. Callahan didn't answer immediately. He scanned the wooded path beyond the church, tree limbs bending in the wind. "A safe house," he said finally. "It's off-grid. They won't find her there for now." Helena stayed back near the church, watching. Her face was unreadable, cold, and Thomas had the unsettling sense that she knew far more than she was letting on. There was a calculation in her expression, a patience that unnerved him. As they moved down the muddy path, the forest seemed alive. Rain splashed into puddles that mirrored the night sky, distorted shapes appearing and vanishing with each step. Thomas kept glancing over his shoulder, expecting the hunters to emerge at any moment. The storm seemed to amplify his paranoia. The snapping branches, the rustle of unseen creatures, the echo of distant thunder. But he knew this fear was grounded. Someone was following them, someone who would not hesitate. The dog slowed, sniffing the air, then suddenly growled, a deep, warning sound that made Thomas stop. Through the blur of rain and shadow, a figure stepped into the path. Tall, lean, with a mask that glinted under the dim light. Thomas froze. Lila gasped, and Callahan raised a hand, ready to act. "You shouldn't have run," the figure said, voice distorted by the mask. Thomas raised his shotgun. "Stay back." The masked figure laughed, a hollow, chilling sound. Then, in a sudden blur, they lunged at Callahan. Shots rang out. Thomas fired, the thunder of his shotgun mixing with the storm. The dog barked furiously, diving at the figure, teeth snapping. Lila screamed and Thomas spun toward her, pulling her behind him. When the smoke cleared, the figure lay on the muddy ground, unmoving. Callahan knelt beside them, removing the mask. Thomas's stomach dropped. The face beneath was familiar, horrifying. It was the mayor of Miller's Ford. "You," Thomas whispered. The betrayal was a knife twisting in his chest. The mayor had been behind the disappearances, the abductions, the network that Helena had hinted at. And now, confronted in the dark woods, the truth was undeniable. The mayor smiled faintly, lips curling. "You think you're protecting her, father? You have no idea what you're holding." Callahan stood, hands trembling slightly. "He's done," Callahan said, voice low. But his eyes betrayed something else. A question, a doubt. The line between justice and revenge had blurred decades ago, and now Thomas could see it in every movement, every hesitation. Helena finally stepped forward, her voice cutting through the rain. "It's not over. Even if he stopped, there are others. People who have buried this town in lies. You've only scratched the surface, father." Thomas felt Lila squeeze his hand. She looked up at him, eyes wide, but her expression was no longer terror. It was hope. The dog nuzzled her shoulder, warm and steady, a living anchor in the storm. Callahan exhaled sharply. We take her to safety. We can't let anyone else know where she is. Ever. Thomas nodded. He realized then that trust was complicated, layered, often dangerous. Callahan had saved Lila, yes, but the shadow of past failures hung heavy over him. And Helena, he didn't know if she was an ally or another threat entirely. But for now, all that mattered was keeping the girl alive. The path to the safe house was long and treacherous, muddy and slick. Rain poured down in sheets, and lightning split the sky, illuminating the twisted branches of the forest like skeletal fingers. Thomas felt the weight of every step, the enormity of responsibility pressing down on him. Every heartbeat was a reminder that they were not out of danger. When they finally reached the small, hidden cabin that Callahan had prepared, Thomas set Lila down. She collapsed onto the dry floor, exhausted, the dog curling beside her protectively. Thomas knelt, brushing strands of wet hair from her forehead. You're safe now, he said softly. You really are. Callahan set about securing the cabin, checking locks, barricading windows, scanning the dark forest beyond. Helena watched silently, her expression unreadable. Thomas felt a wave of relief, but it was tempered by a gnawing unease. The town of Miller's Ford was built on secrets, and even if this night was won, the war was far from over. Hours passed in tense silence. Lila slept fitfully, murmuring words Thomas couldn't understand. The dog remained alert, ears twitching at every sound outside. Thomas finally allowed himself to sit back, exhausted, heart still pounding. He realized he hadn't eaten, hadn't slept, hadn't felt truly safe since the rain began. Callahan approached him quietly. You did good, Father, he said, voice low. You kept her alive. That's all that matters. Thomas shook his head. It's never that simple. Not in Miller's Ford. Not with people like Helena or you or them. Callahan met his gaze, the weight of years etched into his features. Sometimes it has to be, we make choices, and we live with them. Thomas nodded slowly. The words felt hollow, but necessary. There was truth in them. A bitter truth that he had learned over decades of service and solitude. He glanced at the sleeping girl, and the dog curled at her side. For now, at least, the night was theirs. But dawn would bring new challenges, new questions, and Thomas knew one thing with certainty. Trust was fragile, and the shadows of Miller's Ford were long. Helena finally spoke, voice quiet but cutting. You think she's safe, but the town never forgets. And neither do they. Thomas looked at her, saw the glint of steel in her eyes, and realized he had misjudged her, or perhaps understood her too well. Morally gray, calculating, dangerous, a survivor, and yet perhaps the only one who could navigate the twisted web that Miller's Ford had become. The dog lifted its head, ears twitching, and Thomas felt a quiet resolve settle over him. He would protect Lila, no matter the cost. He would face the shadows, confront the betrayals, and carry the weight of secrets too long hidden. Morning came slowly, the storm breaking into soft rain. Sunlight filtered weakly through clouds, painting the cabin in muted gold. Lila stirred, blinking against the light, and Thomas realized the first time in hours he had allowed himself to breathe. Father, she whispered. Yes, Lila? Are we really safe? Thomas knelt beside her, smiling faintly. For now. But safety is a promise we make each day, and I promise you I will keep you safe. The dog nudged her hand, and she laughed softly. It was a fragile sound, but full of life. Thomas felt the tension ease slightly, though he knew it was only temporary. Callahan stepped to the door, looking back at them. We're going to have to move again soon. They'll come for her if they know we're here. Thomas nodded. Then we'll move. Together. But not tonight. Tonight, she sleeps. And I finally rest. Helena stayed silent, watching the girl, then the dog, then Thomas. Her expression softened, almost imperceptibly. You've done well, Father. For now. The morning light stretched across the cabin floor, illuminating the trio, Thomas, the girl, and the dog, an unlikely family bound by fear, survival, and trust. And though the shadows of Miller's Ford were long and dangerous, for the first time, Thomas felt the faintest spark of hope. Outside, the storm receded, leaving a quiet, wash-clean world. Inside, hearts beat with the fragile rhythm of survival. And Thomas realized that sometimes the smallest acts, opening a door, trusting a dog, holding a child, could change everything. For now, at least, the night was over,